chosen ones must stay, and somewhere in that phrase lies a question that's been pressing against your chest since before you had words for it. Not a question you asked. One that asked you. You felt it as a child, in rooms that went quiet when you walked in conversations that shifted the moment you opened your mouth. Something in you was running at a different frequency, and the world around you sensed it before you did. Not because you were performing anything, because you couldn't stop broadcasting something you'd never chosen to send. That's where it really begins, not in the drama of being different, but in the quiet, cellular fact of it. The way a single tuning fork struck in an empty hall will cause every other tuning fork in the room to shiver without being touched. You were the fork that was always already vibrating, and the others shivered and didn't know why, and some of them called that shivering love, and some called it threat, and some just moved closer until the warmth became too much and then pulled away without explanation, leaving you standing in the aftermath, wondering what you'd done. You'd done nothing. That's what no one told you. What you were carrying wasn't a burden you'd built from poor choices or unhealed wounds, though those exist and we'll get to them. What you were carrying was signal. A specific, unalterable signal that had been written into your structure before you ever walked into any of the rooms that later turned your way. And a real tragedy, the one that cost you years, wasn't that others couldn't receive it. It was that you believed their inability meant the signal itself was wrong. So you turned the dial. You learned to compress what was expansive in you, to speak quietly what was meant to carry, to apologize for the frequency before anyone had even complained about the sound. Pause. Now pull back far enough that the rooms disappear. What remains is something vast, a pattern running across generations, across bloodlines, across every soul that's ever carried this particular assignment. The chosen ones who must stay aren't staying out of stubbornness or spiritual pride. They're staying because something has been seeded in them that needs rootedness to complete its full cycle. A seed pressed into moving water doesn't germinate. It simply travels. And there's a difference, a real structural difference between a soul in motion and a soul in mission. That difference is what we're talking about here. Why chosen ones must stay. What staying actually costs. What staying actually releases. The answer isn't what it looks like from the outside, and it's not what it's felt like from the inside either. It lives somewhere in the layered space between those two perspectives, in the place where loneliness and purpose occupy the same square inch of your chest at the same time. Just beyond that lives the first moment you can remember, the earliest evidence that something in you was already different, already tuned, already receiving what no one else in the room seemed to be picking up. There was a moment. Long before anyone called you chosen, before you had language for any of this. You were young, maybe 6, maybe 8, and you noticed you were seeing things other people weren't seeing. Not visions. Not anything dramatic. Something subtler. You could feel the real thing underneath whatever was being said. You could sense when an adult was lying, not from their words, but from a shift in the room that nobody else seemed to register. And you learned quickly that pointing it out got you in trouble. So you stopped pointing. You didn't stop seeing, you just filed it away in a part of yourself that became a private archive, one you've been quietly adding to your whole life. That's the first beat. The earliest shape of who you actually are. A perception system that came online before anyone had a chance to train you in what you were supposed to ignore. Then came the season you tried hardest to be normal. And that season wasn't a failure, it was an intelligent adaptation. You watched how other people moved through the world and you built a version of it for yourself. You learned to laugh at the right moments, to downplay what you noticed, to nod along with conversations that felt like eating cardboard. You got good at it. Convincing, even. People who'd known you for years had no idea, except your body never believed the performance. Your body was keeping score the whole time. The tension in your shoulders at family gatherings, The exhaustion that hit after an hour in a room full of people pretending everything was fine while the undercurrent was thick with things nobody was saying. The way you'd come home from a perfectly pleasant evening and need 2 days to recover, not because something was wrong with you, but because your nervous system had been quietly translating everyone's unfelt emotions the entire time you were there. You were an empathy receiver running at full gain in a world that trains most people to broadcast noise. That's not sensitivity as weakness. That's a radar system operating beyond its tolerance because nobody gave you an off switch. Nobody told you that empathic receptivity isn't a personality trait, it's a function, and it can be regulated, and the failure to regulate it is what makes you feel like you're drowning in other people. The braking wasn't punishment, it was precision. When a storm forms over open water, it doesn't consult the coastline. It doesn't ask permission from whatever structures will be tested. It simply gathers heat into pressure, pressure into motion, motion into something that reshapes whatever it touches. And the reshaping isn't violence, it's physics. It's what happens when something that's been building for a long time finally reaches the point where containment isn't possible anymore. That's what moved through you, not a crisis of identity, but a crisis of architecture. The frame could no longer hold the weight. The rooms you'd built, the ones labeled acceptable, appropriate, manageable, those rooms were never designed to hold what you actually carry. They were temporary lodging, a place to stay while you waited for permission you didn't even know you were waiting for. And when the permission never came, because it never comes, the pressure found the cracks. The braking was not punishment. It was precision. When a storm forms over open water, it doesn't consult the coastline. It doesn't ask permission from the structures that will be tested. It simply gathers heat into pressure, pressure into motion, motion into something that reshapes whatever it touches. And the reshaping isn't violence, it's physics, it's consequence. It's what happens when something that's been building for a long time finally reaches the point where it can no longer be contained. That's what moved through you, not a crisis of identity, a crisis of architecture. The frame could no longer hold the weight. The rooms you'd built, the ones labeled acceptable, appropriate, manageable, those rooms were never built to house what you actually carry. They were guest quarters, temporary lodging, a place to wait while you looked for permission you didn't even know you were waiting for. And when that permission never came, because it never does, the pressure found the cracks. Here's what the people around you missed. They saw retreat. They saw you pulling back from gatherings, from conversations, from that performance of availability you'd kept up for years. What they couldn't see, what they had no way to see, was that you weren't retreating at all. You were being recalled. Like an instrument sent down to gather data at impossible depths, you were being drawn back toward the surface not because something had gone wrong, but because the next phase required something different. A recalibration, a reorientation. The silence they read as distance was actually listening. Pause, because something was broadcasting. And for the first time, maybe the first time in your entire life, you stopped transmitting long enough to hear it. Not with your ears, with the part of you that knows things before they arrive. The part that wakes you at 3:47 in the morning with a clarity that's gone by breakfast but leaves something behind you can't quite shake. That part, the one you learned to quiet because it made you hard to read at dinner, difficult to schedule because it kept pointing toward a life that looked nothing like the one everyone agreed you should want. That part was always the one calling. And the distance you feel now between where you stand and who you were, that's not a gap to be afraid of. It's the space a calling carves out so there's room for what comes next. And somewhere inside that is a question you've carried longer than any of the others, one you haven't said out loud. Maybe not even to yourself, a quiet wondering that surfaced years ago when you first felt that the stories you'd been handed about who you are were too small. That a map didn't match the terrain, that you were walking through someone else's description of a place that had never existed. You buried it. You had to, but it never stopped asking, and it hasn't forgotten. The tension between what you carry and what others can receive, it doesn't resolve by finding better words. That's the thing nobody tells you. The assumption is that the right framing, the right tone, the right moment will finally make them understand what you are and why the distance is necessary. It won't. Not because they're bad people. Not because they're against you, but because what you're carrying is tuned to a frequency they haven't tuned themselves to receive. A signal can't reach a receiver built for a different spectrum. You can broadcast until you're hollow, and if they're not built to decode it, what comes through on their end will always be noise, always distortion, always you as the problem. Which means the distance isn't a punishment, it's physics. And here's the part that feels like a contradiction, and it needs to sit with you for a moment because it won't resolve neatly, and that's the point. The solitude that protects the signal is the same solitude that makes you wonder if you imagined the whole thing. The silence that holds the recalibration is the same silence that echoes back at 3 in the morning asking whether any of this is real, or whether you're just alone, for reasons that have nothing to do with purpose. Both things are true at once. The protection and the doubt. They live in the same room, they breathe the same air, and just past that is the actual reason your presence unsettles certain people before a word is spoken, the unspoken architecture of who is strengthened by being near you and who is drained. Once you see that clearly, you stop asking permission for the distance. It becomes as natural as gravity, as obvious as breathing. That kind of self-examination doesn't come through discipline, it arrives on its own. The people who carry something real aren't at peace with easier answers, not because they're troubled, but because something in them won't let the question close before its time. The doubt is load-bearing. Take it away, and what's left softens into something decorative. Something that looks right but doesn't hold weight. Sit with a single moment of that doubt. A thought surfaces, precise, quiet, carrying more weight than its arrival seems to warrant. The mind circles it, tests it, finds no clean origin, and yet it stays unchanged while every argument against it eventually wears out. That's the texture of the real thing, not thunderous, not performing, just durable in a way that imitation can't sustain. Now widen the frame. Across recorded human experience, in traditions separated by ocean and century, by language and geography, the same shape keeps appearing. A figure who knows before knowing seems justified, who holds contradiction without fracturing, who is hollowed out by proximity to certain people and restored by solitude. The repetition isn't coincidence. It's a pattern woven into something older than any one culture's telling of it. Whatever the mechanism, biological, spiritual, or somewhere those two words stop being opposites, the pattern persists, recognized across more than a dozen distinct traditions. Carried in story long before anyone tried to explain it in language. That self-interrogation doesn't arrive as discipline. It arrives as nature. The ones who carry genuine signal aren't at peace with easier answers, not because something is wrong with them, but because something deeper in how they are built refuses to let the question close too soon. The doubt is load-bearing. Remove it, and the whole structure softens into something decorative. Something that looks real but can't hold weight. Come closer for a moment. Think of a single instance of that doubt. A thought surfaces, precise, unbidden, carrying more weight than its quiet arrival seems to justify. The mind circles it, tests it, finds no satisfying origin, and yet it stays unchanged while every argument against it gradually wears itself out. That's the texture of the real thing, not thunderous, Not performing, just durable in a way that imitation can't sustain. Now widen the frame. Across recorded human experience, in traditions separated by oceans and centuries, by language and geography, the same shape keeps appearing, a figure who knows before knowing is warranted, who holds contradiction without fracturing, who is diminished by certain people and restored by solitude. Pause. The repetition isn't coincidence. It's a pattern in something older than any single culture's telling of it. Whatever the mechanism, biological, spiritual, some territory where those two words stop being opposites, the pattern persists, recognized across more than a dozen distinct traditions, encoded in story long before anyone tried to explain it in language. And here is the quiet exhale at the center of all of it. Chosen ones must doubt. Not as a flaw in the design, as the design itself. The doubt is the verification process running continuously, distinguishing genuine signal from the noise of ego and old wounds. Systems built for high-frequency work require constant calibration. The questioning is the calibration. Without it, the instrument drifts. With it, it holds true across decades, across pressure, across the accumulated weight of being consistently misread by people who were never equipped to read the signal in the first place. That misreading by others, and sometimes by the self, threads through everything. It's woven into the daily texture of what it means to carry this particular blueprint. The doubt and the knowing live together, inseparable, each making the other more precise. And from that woven doubt comes something unexpected, a need for solitude that isn't avoidance, it's calibration. The system resets only in extended silence. When that silence is neglected, something begins to erode. Subtly at first, then structurally. This isn't preference. It's the physiology of the spirit. Beyond that silence, something further opens, brief moments where the membrane between the present and what hasn't arrived yet thins to near transparency. A glimpse, not fantasy, not wishful thinking, something closer to a memory of a life not yet lived, recognized somehow as your own. This is the witness of something being finished in the deep. There's an image that anchors what happens next. A vault. Not metaphorical, structurally real in the energetic architecture you carry. This vault seals during periods of recalibration. Not slowly. Not partially. Completely. The people who once accessed you, pulled from you, took what they needed and called it relationship. They encounter the seal before their minds can name what they are feeling. And what registers in them is rejection, coldness. Your stillness reads to them as withdrawal, because extraction is the only relational language they know. But you didn't close the door, the calibration closed it. The realignment of incoming authority, of assignment, of resources being positioned. These installations require total containment, no interference. No outside noise bleeding into the transmission while new architecture is being formed. They're not locked out of you. They're locked out of a process that was never theirs to witness. When someone reads your stillness as distance, as arrogance, as rejection, you won't need to defend yourself. You won't explain. The seal holds without your permission. It isn't a wall, it's a gestation chamber sealed from the inside, quiet, humming with reconstruction. The authority being woven into your chest in that silence will eventually speak in a voice you don't yet recognize as your own. What forms inside that chamber can't be rushed by anyone's discomfort. This image returns later, the vault door closed against everything that once drained you, and when it does, you recognize it as the chamber where your previous capacity was dismantled and rebuilt to carry a weight that would have shattered the person you were before the seal closed. The unsettling effect you have on certain people isn't something you're doing, it's the sound of a door closing that they didn't know was there. And so we arrive at the place where understanding presses against the body and asks to become motion. Everything up to this point has been clarification, the physics of it, the vault, the reason the distance isn't coldness. But clarification on its own changes nothing. A person can understand why the seal is necessary and still live outside it. They can trace every line of the pattern and still keep handing their energy to people who have never once returned it replenished. Knowing doesn't move flesh. Something else has been waiting. That quiet, unanswered question from earlier, whether the door closes because we're being punished or because we're being prepared, lands here. It lands quietly. The door closed because the weight was arriving, and the person who used to stand there couldn't have carried it without breaking. That's not punishment. That's architecture. The silence wasn't absence. It was the sound of scaffolding being erected around a soul that was about to hold more than it had ever asked for. Think of the single conversation that keeps surfacing in the quiet. Not the large confrontation rehearsed for months. Something smaller and far more costly. The email not sent. The boundary not drawn, not because its location is unclear, but because drawing it will make something real that has been kept safely theoretical. Or maybe it isn't a conversation at all. Maybe it's a prayer kept on indefinite pause. Not the polite one offered when someone asks. The one that, if spoken with full presence, would rearrange everything downstream of it. The one that trembles because it suspects it will be answered. One of these three rests in your keeping right now. The unsent email, the undrawn boundary, the unspoken prayer. That question from earlier, whether the door closes as punishment or preparation, it lands here, quietly. The door closed because the weight was arriving, and the person who used to stand there couldn't have carried it without breaking. That's not punishment. That's architecture. The silence wasn't absence. It was the sound of something being built around a soul that was about to hold more than it had ever asked for. Think about the single conversation that keeps rising up in the quiet, not the big confrontation you've rehearsed for months, but something smaller, something that costs more. The email you haven't sent. The boundary you haven't drawn, not because you don't know where it belongs, but because drawing it will make something real that you've kept safely theoretical. Or maybe it isn't a conversation at all. Maybe it's a prayer that's been sitting on pause, not the polished one you offer when someone asks, the one that, if you actually said it out loud, fully, with your whole self present, would rearrange everything that comes after it. The one that trembles because part of you suspects it will be answered. One of those three lives in your keeping right now. The unsent email, the undrawn boundary, the unspoken prayer. Pause. What tends to mark people who have stood at this exact threshold is a pattern of waiting for the full picture before taking a single step. That's the trained mind at work. The part that wants to be certain before it moves. But certainty isn't what activates anything. Obedience is. And obedience doesn't ask for the full map. It asks for the first yes. One small yes, so quiet it almost feels irrelevant, and everything else grows out from that point. I learned this in a spring I can't forget. At a kitchen table in a flat in Portobello, Edinburgh, with a borrowed mini-disc recorder running, I spoke the opening words of something I'd been assembling since 1997. 6 years of research, 6 years of practice. The work was ready, the calling was clear. 90 seconds in, the recording stopped. I took the disc out and put it in the same drawer that held my father's letters. It stayed there for over a year. Pause. Just beyond that, the year the disc spent in the dark, there's a different kind of chamber, not built from hesitation, built from something far more honest. Of the three, which one is yours? The email, the boundary, the prayer. That's not a rhetorical question. It's a diagnostic one, and the answer not something spoken aloud, not typed anywhere, but the one that arrives in the silence of wherever you are right now. That answer is the first yes. Not preparation for something, the thing itself. The visible shift, the public step, the outcome someone else can measure. That's only the echo of a yes that already happened in private. Often weeks earlier, in a moment that looked, from the outside, like nothing at all. Obedience scales, but it moves from small to large, never the other way. The hand that can't send the email won't be trusted with the platform. The hand that can't draw the boundary won't be trusted with the assignment. The voice that won't pray the dangerous prayer won't be given the answer. And for most people, the blockage isn't capability. It's a story they're still carrying about what it means to move without full visibility. Something absorbed from institutions, from family, from a culture that rewards certainty over faith. The quiet lesson that moving before the whole staircase appears is irresponsible. But the staircase doesn't appear before the step. It appears as the step. That's not a metaphor. That's just how every genuine calling actually works. And the step being avoided isn't the biggest one, it's the smallest. The one no one would notice. The one that could be taken in the next 24 hours, without announcement, without defense, without asking permission from anyone. What sat in that drawer wasn't waiting for a credential, it was waiting for a first small yes. And when that yes finally came, when the permission-seeking ended and the step was actually taken, the drawer became a threshold, not a tomb. The darkness wasn't rejection, it was incubation. The silence wasn't abandonment, it was the hush before the note that changes the whole composition. Pause. Just beyond that hush, something begins to move with its own velocity, its own intelligence, its own sense of timing. A current that doesn't ask for resumes, doesn't pause to check whether the vessel feels ready. It moves because a yes was spoken into the dark, and that movement has a name. What belongs to you already has your name written into its structure, not the name your family gave you, but something spoken before time had a clock. No one is claiming it on your behalf. The claiming happens in the quiet where a person stops negotiating and simply acknowledges what was always true. Some call it destiny. But the foundation underneath destiny is simpler than that, and more frightening. It's recognition. Not acquiring, not striving. Recognizing what was held in trust long before you knew to ask for it, then stepping into alignment with a trust that never broke, even when trust in everything else did. All those years of silence weren't punishment. They were preservation. A seed buried in winter doesn't cry out for an explanation. It waits, not because waiting is virtuous, but because something inside it knows the season better than the soil does. That same intelligence stirs now in the deepest layer of what this time has been protecting. The vault never held you, it held the version of you that couldn't be released until the old version stopped demanding the keys. That exchange has already happened. The door is already open. What walks out wears your face but carries a weight of presence that'll feel unfamiliar at first, like putting on clothes tailored for someone slightly larger. Then realizing they fit, because the frame has expanded. Pause. The wonder that lingered at the beginning, whether the silence meant abandonment or preparation, it finds its answer now, not as a declaration, as a quiet exhale. The silence was the preparation. Every unanswered prayer, every closed door, every season of invisibility, that was the kiln, not the rejection. The fire was never trying to destroy anything. It was baking the vessel until it could hold what was coming without shattering, and what's coming needs no announcement. It moves at its own pace, unconcerned with readiness, arriving at exactly the moment the inner alignment completes. The fire was never trying to destroy anything. It was baking the vessel until it could hold what was coming without shattering,